A month ago, do you know what it was doing outside? Snow. And the next day, the Monday after a month ago, we had a mess around here, didn't we? Lots and lots of snow. Well, there was one guy in our area that decided that he was going to take on the snow problem right away. Went, got his snow blower, took it outside, fired it up, rip roaring and ready to go, to clear off the sidewalks and the driveway and everything else. And though the snowblower started, he realized that his snowblower had a problem. It wouldn't blow snow. And it was making very weird rattling noises. So his day changed and he grabbed that snowblower, turned it off, put it in the garage, and went on a journey that was an all-day mess and an affair, tearing the snowblower apart, trying to fix it, doing something that would have taken a small engine mechanic about an hour to resolve. It took this guy all day long, but he finally got the snowblower fixed. Now that guy is me. What a mess that was that day. You see, I am not a mechanic, nor am I the son of a mechanic. Now, why did I use that phrase? The reason I use that is because today's prophet that we are looking at, today's minor prophet, Amos, said these words, "I am not the prophet nor the son of a prophet." Now, even though I'm not a mechanic or the son of a mechanic, I felt that I needed to tear that sucker apart and get it running. I think that was the right thing to do. I hope so. I'm going to find out if I fire it up tomorrow. But you see, Amos, who was neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet, he had a calling from God. The Lord took him while he was tending the flocks. See, he was a shepherd. And he said, "I want you to go prophesy to my people." Even though he wasn't a prophet, he was told, "You go prophesy, buddy." And you know what? Sometimes getting advice or a message from a good old boy or a gal, rather than listening to a professional, is a good thing. So I want you to think of Amos today as that good old boy that you better listen to as we major in the prophets today, the minor prophets. Amos, what does he have to tell us? What's the message of this non-prophet prophet, this good old boy? Well, before we get to today's passage, which, as these other messages, we're looking at what I believe to be the heart of the prophetic message of these minor prophets, let's get some background information. You may remember some things about Amos because we did a message series on him last year, a year ago. And so some of this may be familiar because we did cover some of it not so long ago. Amos, his name means burden bearer. And oh, what a burden he was bearing as a non-professional prophet. What was his profession? Well, he was a herdsman and he was a fig tree farmer. Interesting. Came from a little place called Tekoa, which was located in the southern kingdom of Judah. Remember, God's people are divided into northern Israel, southern Judah. Tekoa was in the south. But his message was no way, in any way, limited to the people in his area down south. God gave him a message that everybody needed to hear. And that message went out to everybody around Amos's sphere of influence. Now, what was the message? Well, the message was pretty much the same to all these different people that God had it up to here with their sins and their nonsense. And he puts it in a strange way through Amos. The Lord roars out for 3 sins of this people group, even for 4. I will not revoke the punishment. We may not talk that way today, but basically it means I've had it up to here, and now trouble is coming. Now when Amos begins, again, he doesn't speak to the people in his home area. He starts with nations that were not part of the people of God surrounding that holy land. He was either speaking to the nation itself or the capital city of a nation representing that nation. What were they doing that the Lord needed to roar out to these nations? Oh my goodness, all kinds of things. Things such as acts of evil and injustice, war crimes, forced slavery, violating national treaties, acts of vengeance, expanding your borders through terrorism, and desecrating the corpse of a sovereign ruler. Those were pretty serious events then, and they would be serious events today. God had enough. That's chapter 1 of Amos, by the way. All of you nations surrounding the people of God who are not my people, I've had it with you. Then when you get to chapter 2, what does Amos do? Well, God calls him to focus on the people there in the southern kingdom of Israel, where he prophesied from, supposedly, or at least where he lived. What did the people in Judah do? Why did God have it up to here with them? Well, they continuously violated God's laws, and because they did that, they were in trouble because they should have known better. What was going on was their forefathers had this chain of events where they were violating God's will and God's law, and the next generation and the next generation just kept on doing it. They knew better, but they kept on doing what their forefathers were doing as acts of sin and not listening to the Lord. Not good. Then from the rest of chapter 2, all the way to the end of the book, just for a few verses at the end, all the way through that, from chapter 2 to chapter 9, then God uses Amos to roar out to the people in northern Israel. These people are in the most hot water. What did they do? Well, where do you even begin? They were involved in forced slavery. They also, if they heard a prophet telling the truth, they would go to that prophet and tell him to shut up. They forced those who made promises or commitments to God to break those promises. They took advantage of the poor and the oppressed. They were involved in serious sexual immorality. They utilized lending processes that were greedy and just exorbitant interest rates. Oh, they were idol worshipers. Oh, and by the way, you might think, boy, these were a bunch of bad guys. It just wasn't the men. We find out later on that the women were in on it as well. Sorry, ladies, but that's just the truth of it. They hated judges who were judging honestly and did the right thing. Excessive taxation, especially to the poor, taking bribes, and doing all of this stuff while they were living in comfortable homes in a comfy lifestyle. That's not good. It's not much different than what we may see in the modern world. So what's the heart of the problem? Why is all of this going on? Well, let me use a phrase that we use in our fellowship and churches of God that we call faith and practice. We say that the Bible is our only source of faith, or our only rule of faith and practice. Faith is your belief, how you exercise your faith in worshiping and learning about and praying to God. And practice is then what you do with it when you get out of here and you go out about your business the rest of the week. Faith and practice. Well, what was happening was we had a situation here where the people had an unjust, phony, terrible faith. A ridiculous faith that wasn't even real. A fake faith that fed these evil practices. I think we see I guess you'd say a progression here, that if your faith is shallow and lacking and not even real, it's going to naturally result in the practices being likewise. That's what was happening with the people of God. So let's read what's going on here in Amos chapter 5, finally, verses 21 to 24. And you're going to hear this, where God says through Amos, your faith, not good. Instead, you need to practice in this way. Let's look at it now. Amos chapter 5 and verse 21. Read with me, if you will, on page 913 of the Pew Bibles, or in your own Bible, or if you have an app that you want to use, that's fine. Follow along as I read, beginning in verse 21. The Lord said through Amos, I despise your feasts, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the peace offerings of your fattened animals, I will not look upon them. Take away from me the noise of your songs. To the melody of your harps, I will not listen. But, here comes the practice, let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. That ends the lesson. So God wants his people to be just in faith matters. Just be just in how you practice your faith. And what you're doing right now, I don't want it. Verse 21, the feasts. What are feasts? These were festivals that God's people celebrated to commemorate events of what God did in their midst. For example, we've heard of Passover before. Passover was the commemoration of the angel of death passing over God's people while they were enslaved in Egypt because they put the blood of the lamb on their doorposts. But the firstborns of the Egyptians, they were taken from them. That was a big deal. And so they had a festival to commemorate this. And the Jews still do this to this day. Following that was the Feast of Unleavened Bread. How from Passover the people had to flee Egypt very quickly. And so they fled by eating unleavened bread that didn't take that long to make. And they got out of there. There was the Feast of the First Fruits, one of 3 harvest festivals, thanking God for his provision. The Feast of Weeks, or Pentecost. That occurred from the 50th day of the Feast of First Fruits, and it was a day to celebrate more of God's provision, and it also became known with the law of God, celebrating his law. Feast of Trumpets, commemorating the end of the cultural year, the agricultural year that is, and the upcoming Day of Atonement, getting ready for that. On that note, there was the Feast of the Day of Atonement for God to get for the people to get their hearts right before God, and then the Feast of Tabernacles. That's when God's people would actually build little shelters, and they'd stay in them for a short period of time to be reminded of how it was when they left Egypt and wandered through the wilderness in temporary dwellings. So these festivals were a big deal. But what does God say? Even though he told them to keep these festivals, he says, I hate them because their hearts were not right. It was a joke. Verse 21, same thing. Solemn assemblies? Nope, no good either. These were special gatherings for holy occasions, maybe a time of fasting, maybe something special that the Lord wanted to tell his people during the feasts. And what does he say? Does he say, hey, your solemn assemblies, your gatherings, this is great. Let's have some more. In fact, I have some ideas. The Lord's saying, I have ideas how to get more people to come. Let's pad the pews. Let's make the parking lot bigger. Nope, he doesn't say anything like that. I hate them. I despise them. I can't stand them. Verse 23, what about the music? What about the music? We'll skip to verse 23. Well, music was very important in Old Testament worship like it is today. Does God want them to sing to the King who is coming to reign? That's a song we sing at the 10:30 service, by the way. Nope. He says, take away your songs. I don't even want to hear your harps playing. Wow. Back up to verse 22. Even the offerings. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Surely the Lord wants the offerings. Many different offerings were prescribed for God's people to give to the Lord. 3 of them are mentioned here. The burnt offering, a sacrifice that was made for the atonement of sin. The grain offering, an expression of devotion to God, thanking him for his goodness and his providence. And a peace offering, celebrated the fellowship that God's people had with him and with humanity. Is God saying, wow, these offerings are great. Let's find out how we can get some more people to give to the offering. Nope, he will not accept them. He will not even look at them. I don't want them. This is pretty severe, knowing that all of this stuff that the people are doing was commanded by God in the law. But now he's saying, I don't want it. It's because it was all fake and phony baloney. Proverbs chapter 15 and verse 8 tells us this: the sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but the prayer of the upright is acceptable to him. Outwardly, they were doing their religious duties, carrying them on, though, at the same time while they were doing injustice, idolatry, all kinds of sin. What a joke. It's similar to, let's say, you were graduating. Now, I think everybody here is beyond the age of graduation that's gathered at this early service. But whether it's your high school graduation, or if you went to a trade school or a university or somewhere else, and maybe someone comes there and they come up to you and shake your hand and let you know that they're so proud of you for what you did, and they want to get a selfie with you maybe and put it on social media, and they're making a big deal out of you, but deep down in, while they're there, they hate you, they don't like you, and when they leave, they talk garbage around you when they're not around you. Do you want someone to do that to you? I wouldn't want that. That's pretty much what God's people were doing to their God. And God says, enough, enough. So what does God want? Well, verse 24 tells us, but this is what I want you to do. Do away with the phony worship and change your practice. I would venture to say God wants them to practice real worship, and then their practice, how they carry out their life, is going to change. How does God want them to practice the way that they act and their faith out in among other people? Verse 24, it says, but let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Two things he's looking for here: righteousness and justice. He mentions justice first, righteousness second, but we are going to talk about these. Well, let's go in that order. Let's talk about justice first. What does justice mean? Justice and righteousness are very, very similar. They're not much different, but there's a little bit of a tweaking we can make. Justice, if you will, is the treating of people decently and fairly. Just do it. Just treat people decent. Okay? That's all God is asking for. And from some of the things we mentioned, that wasn't happening. Just start doing it. Knock off the oppressive lending. Knock off oppressing the poor. Just stop it. Just treat people decent. And the other thing he says is, I want you to practice righteousness. Righteousness means doing the right thing at all times. Justice is how you treat people. Righteousness is, no matter what you're doing the right thing. Last year when we looked at this passage, I told you the story about a piano player whose name is associated with the Hebrew word for righteousness. See if you can figure it out, because I look at the crowd here today, and this piano player has been around for a long time. I wouldn't ask this at the youth group necessarily, or the kids, any of the kids' gatherings, but the word righteousness, after I give you the Hebrew word, tell me who the famous piano player is who goes by this name. The word righteousness in Hebrew is tzedakah. Is that right? Ring a bell? Who are we talking about? You heard of Neil Sedaka? Neil Sedaka, as we say. Neil Sedaka, he is a Jewish man. And one time when he did an interview, he said he was so proud of his name, that his name means righteousness. Now, why did I bring that up? There's an object lesson in that. Isn't it a wonderful thing when people look at, God's people looks at us, and they associate us with justice and righteousness, so much so that they can almost make that your name? That's what God is looking for. That's what God wants from his people. Let justice, treating people fairly and decently, and righteousness, doing the right thing, roll on like waterfalls, like rushing water. Now, if anyone might say, well, does Amos say this because, well, that's just practical? You know, you get along better in life if you do the right thing and treat people well. No, it reflects the very character of God. Psalm 89:14 and other places says, righteousness and justice are the foundation of God's throne. So what does this have to do with us today? Well, the one thing we need to realize is that there's a general principle here, like I said earlier. A phony faith feeds into unjust practice. Later in the book of Amos, we'll go to one more part of Amos very quickly. In Amos chapter 8, verses 5 and 6, it says, the people of God were saying, when will the new moon be over? When may we sell grain, and the Sabbath, that we may offer wheat for sale, that we may make the ephah small and the shekel great, and deal deceitfully with false balances, that we may buy the poor for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals, and sell the chaff of the wheat. Do you understand what they said? When's the Sabbath going to be over? When's the festival going to be done? We can't wait to get this religious duty over with. We want to get the heck out of here so that we can go out and we can do our evil deeds. That's what was going on. The one affected the other. Can't wait to get out of church. We hate being here because we want to go be bad. That's what they were dealing with. The one feeds into the other. And Jesus had something to say about this as well. In Matthew chapter 23, verses 27 and 28, Jesus said these words to a group of people in his day that were guilty of these things. He said, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You're like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead men's bones and uncleanness. So also you outwardly appear righteous to others, but inwardly you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. They go hand in hand. And Jesus tells us as well in the Beatitudes that blessings come from having a true hunger for righteousness. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. There's a blessing that comes from that. Now today you may say, how do we see this playing out? How is this in any way practical for the church in 2026? It's no secret that in places like Western Europe and North America, lots of places where the faith is phony and hollow. To be sure, Amos was addressing a systemic problem. This was nationwide in Israel, and as we mentioned, in other nations as well. What about in the West today? We have pockets of it. I would like to think that most of the people that come here and are part of our fellowship have truly been born again and want to be here and love the Lord. And yes, we're not perfect, but you go out and serve in your job or whatever you do during the week, and people can tell a little bit of a difference, if not a lot of a difference, between you and the other person who's a total heathen and hates God. I would hope so. I think that we have a good bit of that going on here. But there are pockets of places where we have congregations that they have a heretical view of God, or a watered down view of God, or they focus on politics all the time, or issues. Or they're there because the gatherings are more like a country club. Or maybe they're there at church to be mesmerized by the entertainment going on up front. Let me tell you something. If you're coming here to be entertained and you're dealing with me, you lose. I ain't here to entertain, and I'm not very entertaining. That's not why God's people are called to be in his presence. But it's happening in many different places. Or just the opposite. There's people, like we mentioned earlier, that are in Israel too. People come to the gathering and they say, oh my goodness, when is this going to be over with so we can get out of here? It's sad, isn't it? And as we see that happen, and as we see the decline in many of these churches and denominations that were once very robust and filled with the Spirit of God, what's happening in society? One feeds the other. But it can also happen on a smaller scale basis. Even in a fellowship like ours, There can be pockets of families or even individuals where the heart is not right. And perhaps someone even here would be coming here thinking, I don't really believe this stuff. I'm bored with this. I can't wait to get out of here. What do you think that's going to do to the lifestyle as you go out of here? Is that good for it? Is that going to encourage a lifestyle of justice and righteousness? I don't think so. I've had people come to me and say to me, yeah, but what do I do on a Sunday if it's gray out and yucky and I come to the Lord's house and I really don't feel like being there, and your message is boring and I don't like the music that day, and and it's not everything that I really wanted? You know what my answer is? You go anyway and you honor God. If you make the decision to honor God, even if the service that day and the gathering, you think it's lackluster, by the fact that you honored God and you heard the word, you have built up your faith. And I'll tell you something that's going to have an effect for the rest of your week. It does make a difference. That's why we're here. So by all means, if there would be anyone here, even today in this small gathering, where your heart isn't right, and you're here as well because, oh, I had to be here, or, well, it just looks good, I really don't want to be, I don't believe this stuff, I don't understand. Now is the day to get your heart right with the Lord. And it will make a difference in your everyday life. The message of Amos for the people of Israel, for the people of Judah, for the people in the nations surrounding those people, is the message for us here today. Dump the deception and just be just. Get your heart right with the Lord, and it will be amazing, the blessings in your life and how that flows from your life in the week that follows. Amen.